You saw the part 2 in the title, you know how these things work. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, or if you want to catch up, you should do that now. I'd still recommend watching part 1 to catch up, but if you just don't have another 40 minutes to burn, here's an undercooked light-speed recap. Ghoul Patrol is the sequel to Zombies Ate My Neighbors, yet despite being a follow-up, its presentation is lacking on basically every metric you could measure. Zam has an appealing palette, fun character designs, a really fun and extremely pointed motif, a killer soundtrack, and tight, well-defined levels. Ghoul Patrol's palette and character designs are dull and bland. The motif has lost all focus. The soundtrack is full of weak and repetitive melodies. The sound effects are unsatisfying and lack clarity. And the levels are often so similar and lacking in identifiable features that everything just kind of bleeds together. That's not necessarily a game killer, though. A lot of failures of presentation can be forgiven or overlooked to some extent in game design. This is a weird medium in that way. I want to talk about Shadow Hearts for a minute. Shadow Hearts is an almost overwhelmingly beautiful game, though it suffers from some padding to get it closer to the runtime people are used to in a JRPG, and the writing is certainly not flawless. It's still an intensely emotional experience. And I mean actually emotional. So many people mean extremely melodramatically sad when they say emotional, but I mean covers a broad range of emotions. Shadow Hearts is a very dark, somber, often twisted game, but it takes time for moments that are peaceful, triumphant, and occasionally wacky. It's a deeply human game, painting with all kinds of emotional colors. It's got an odd sort of gothic romance thing going on. There's just a lot of heart to it. The sequel, Shadow Hearts Covenant, on the other hand, is a totally wacky, yet somehow still pretty factory standard JRPG. The characters are all clownish caricatures, and the sequel's attempts to dip into the darker territory familiar to the original game often come across as jarring or out of place. As if responding to complaints about how the first game didn't have any cutscenes and was too short for an RPG, the sequel has been padded to the point of farce, the story having been bloated so hard and stretched so thin, it approaches becoming incomprehensible. Now, a troupe of one-dimensional clowns pick bits of scenery out of their teeth over 7 hours of unnecessary cutscenes, making their way from meaningless checkpoint to meaningless checkpoint because this is a video game and the player needs something to do for 80 hours. And yet, Shadow Hearts Covenant is able to hone in on the elements that made the first game's combat system unique and kind of engaging, and expands upon it tremendously. The first game's combat system is pretty bare, the battling lacking either much skill or strategy. While the second game isn't nearly as developed or strategic as something like Pokemon, it's a massive leap in the right direction. Options have been expanded enormously, and there are some basic strategic decisions that can swing the direction of a battle beyond just remember to equip the right stuff and click your strongest moves until you win. As a result, Covenant is able to provide something of value anyway. The presentation doesn't offer nearly as tight or as unique of an experience, but the quality of life improvements and expanded combat system make for some decent JRPG junk food. There are people I would recommend Covenant to, and I know people who would prefer the second game over the first one. I just cannot say the same thing about Ghoul Patrol. The uninspired, often aimless and unpleasant presentation is all in service of a game that, cut to the core, just falls apart on nearly every level of design. I'm going to bring this up right now because it's an instantly fatal flaw, and it'll have major impacts on many other elements of design. Ghoul Patrol's controls are horrible. I'm a huge advocate for controller configuration options. Seriously, if Mega Man X1 can figure this out on the Super Nintendo, there's no reason to not get this right. It's just inconsiderate to not accommodate people with alternate control preferences. It's an accessibility issue, and a player convenience issue. Granted, this problem evaporates if you play on an emulator, which pretty much always have robust controller configuration built into the program. But if you're playing an official release, including the modern re-releases, this is an issue you're going to be dealing with, and it's hard to give credit to a game for good design when a third party is the one fixing an issue decades later. Despite ZAM lacking button config, this isn't a horrible problem, since the game's controls are easy to keep track of. The 4 face buttons are Shoot Weapon, Switch Weapon, Use Item, and Switch Item. They're arranged in an identifiable pattern. Here, the Use buttons are circled in red, and the Switch buttons are circled in blue. And here, the Weapon buttons are circled in blue, and the Item buttons are circled in red. This control scheme is simple enough that I had no issue keeping track of this as a 5-year-old. Ghoul Patrol, instead, fucks all of this up for no reason, chaotically tossing the buttons around in a way that doesn't make sense or enhance anything. Worse, it'll directly work against the muscle memory of anybody who's familiar with ZAM, and just generally requires memorization, without a button config option for the player to organize them in a way that makes sense to them. Now, Y is still the shoot button, but the switch weapon button is A, which is hard to hit while you're moving around because the game almost requires you to hold the Y button 95% of the time you're playing the game. X is this weird slide maneuver I have a hard time finding any use for. L and R cycle through your items, but despite having 2 of them, both of them only cycle forward. And to actually use items, you have to push select, again making it hard to use items in a pinch. Finally, the B button is now a jump button? Why? I don't know why this pisses me off so much. Games adding unnecessary jump buttons just strikes such a nerve for me. ZAM reducing its dimensions by omitting height from the game hones the focus in on the core mechanics that make it engaging. Ghoul Patrol just adds a Z-axis for the sake of having one. And, at the risk of spoiling anything, my immediate thought on seeing the jump button was, what's this doing here? Jumping doesn't affect how you engage with enemies like in Mega Man. Either this is a complete waste because this does nothing, or worse, the end game is going to be full of timed jumps over instant death pits because they felt like they needed to justify the jump button somehow. And I was right. It's the second one. But we'll get into that later. Now, if you were paying attention to the control screens, you'll also notice that the radar hasn't been mentioned yet. That's because Ghoul Patrol has removed it completely. Instead, every few seconds, a speech bubble will fly in from the edge of the screen from the next victim the game wants you to save. Literally forever. You can't disable this or turn it off. The game just slaps these speech bubbles all over the screen the entire time you're playing the game. At a glance, this could be seen as an improvement over ZAM, because your neighbor finder no longer has limited range, despite being less precise. However, it's not just imprecise, it's worse than that. The design of Ghoul Patrol's maps often causes this improvised compass to mislead you. On a map like this, the fact that the game is telling you there's a guy to the left isn't helping you. Follow the speech bubble to the left and you'll be stuck. To find the guy, you actually have to go down and to the right from there. Ultimately, whether listening to the compass will make progress or lead you astray is basically random. There's no way to tell if you do or don't have to go that way. And taking directions from a coin flip is the same as taking no directions at all. This makes the Ghoul Patrol compass less than worthless. It offers no help with navigation, while also being intrusive and impossible to disable. It could have worked with better map design, but it could have been acceptable isn't exactly a compelling reason to play a game. Even once all the victims have been rescued, the game keeps farting speech bubbles all over the screen, this time pointing you to the exit. Yet another massive downgrade. Zam's level structure sounds annoying at a glance. It's reminiscent of a lot of horribly shitty shovelware garbage from the Super Nintendo era. Rather than a linear obstacle course, or even a maze with an exit, you're just dropped into a level with no exit in sight and tasked with collecting a bunch of objectives. But here, Zam throws you a bone and just drops the exit right next to you whenever the last objective is either secured or destroyed by an enemy. It prevents you from ever having to backtrack once the objectives have all been completed, while still allowing you to explore other areas, fight monsters to increase your score, or go back for something you missed. Ghoul Patrol takes the same shitty approach as the shovelware garbage. Once you have all the objectives, an exit suddenly appears. Just out there. Somewhere. Keep looking. You'll find it eventually, I bet. This means you have to constantly backtrack through a level now largely devoid of pickups and objectives, refighting enemies you've already fought as you continue trudging through a massive maze, looking for where they decided to put the exit. Additionally, none of Ghoul Patrol's weapons or items are especially valuable in the first place, so actually, there's little reason to pick the level clean anyway, and sticking around to grind for points doesn't do anything, because the score system no longer matters, or even really makes sense as a feature. Alright, so one lose condition in Zam is to just lose all of your lives. But another lose condition is related to the objective of rescuing neighbors. You start the game with 10 neighbors to rescue, but if they take damage from a monster, they die. This reduces your body count by 1, so if you only save 9 people in a level, then only 9 of them appear in the next one. Having a low body count can be dangerous. If the last neighbor dies in a level, and you haven't saved anybody yet, instant game over. Run's dead. Back to the title screen. No checkpoints, no saves, nothing. However, again, the game shows some mercy. Rescuing neighbors, killing monsters, collecting certain items, and completing certain objectives will award you with bonus points. Every time you cross a 40,000 point threshold, while counting up your points on the victory screen, the game will reward you by reviving a neighbor, increasing your body count by 1. If you rescue all 10 neighbors and cross the threshold, the game rewards you with an extra life instead. If you have all 10 neighbors rescued and 6 lives, the game gives you a perfect player bonus, inflating your score and your ego. This is hard to show in clips, but you can only earn one revive each level. If you cross an 80,000 point threshold since the last victory screen, the game will give you one revive now and save the other one for the next victory screen. If you somehow score 1,000,000 points in one level, the game will hand out revives every level for the next 20 levels, and every 40,000 points along the way will add more revives to the pile. I really love the way this is balanced. It doesn't give you everything right away, so you can't just grind all the way back up to 10 neighbors in one level risk-free, but it still keeps track of your progress and doesn't punish you for getting too many points. There's something real elegant about this design. This gives a meaningful reason to collect points to players who don't care about a high score and justifies the existence of all of the bonuses, while sweetening the deal for high score-minded players as well. This even makes the game's relatively high difficulty a feature rather than a bug. Like, a health refill is only a reward if you're low on health, and you'll only be low on health if the game is challenging enough to land hits on you. This is the philosophy behind the original Donkey Kong Country. The levels are very challenging, and you can get set back a lot if you run out of lives. This encourages you to try to pick up bonuses and look for secrets and Kong letters. This makes balancing the game tricky. Too easy and the bonus system doesn't matter, but too hard and the game won't be fun. Just about every Zam ROM hack fails this, since literally all of them increase the difficulty quite a bit. Most Zam hacks seem to be coming from a place of, "You thought Zam was hard? Well, wait till you see this." Nearly all of them play something like this.
I'm thinking of a number between 1 and 100. What is it?
62?
Wrong!
It's hard to really parse how Ghoul Patrol measures up, because this whole feature is just missing from the sequel entirely. Ghoul Patrol has no reward screen, and does not award bonuses for anything. You can't get extra lives or revive neighbors by scoring a lot of points, which makes the inclusion of score items pointless and confusing. Zam had these little coin piles and dollar bills that would add to your score a bit. They're satisfying to pick up and provide progress towards a tangible reward, much like coins in Mario. In fact, the coin pile is worth slightly more progress towards a 1-up than a Mario coin, and the dollar bill is worth slightly more than 2 Mario coins. Most monster kills are worth about a quarter or a half coin, so grinding is possible, but slow and expensive. I think it's an excellent trade-off. Topping yourself off to 100 coins for that revive might require killing 200 or 250 zombies. You can do it if you're really struggling and you're falling behind, but it depletes your ammo and your patience, and it's possible to make mistakes and lose health, so it's not sustainable forever. Heavy grinding like this is pretty firmly a last resort to save a dying run. Mostly, the game is long enough for these to add up over time. Skipping all the bonuses, leaving money on the floor, and excessive running from enemies could be the difference between a run with 3 revives and a run with 10 revives. Additionally, Zam had these hidden bonus items that would unlock optional bonus stages. While generally not completely free, Zam's secret levels are easier and smaller than the main levels, and relatively rich in rare or valuable items. It should take a little less than a minute to show this entire level, and it's a pretty laid-back stage for being past the game's halfway point. This creates an even greater reward for exploration, encouraging you to engage with the game more instead of just sprinting through it as quickly as possible. Yet, they're still completely optional, so you still could run through the game very quickly. But Ghoul Patrol doesn't just cut the fun bonus levels out. The whole reward system is just gone, and points are now an arbitrary number that goes up for no reason. The game doesn't even acknowledge your score at any point. All of this makes the inclusion of dedicated items to raise your score just baffling. What are these money sacks doing here? Look at all this. They aren't even fun to pick up, and yet they're scattered all over the game, occasionally piled up in secret areas that require red potions, arguably the game's most valuable resource, to access. This doesn't even matter, because the game just gives you a crossbow with infinite ammo and levels full of infinite monster spawners. Even if points did do something, you wouldn't need to pick up money bags to get really absurd point totals. Look, Zam's ammo is limited, period. There's no way to just get more if you've picked a level clean, and when you run out, you can't do anything. Having zero ammo means running away from everything until you can get more, in the next level if you have to. Running out on a boss fight is basically a softlock. Run's dead. Game over. Back to the title. Many weapons are valuable, and there's an opportunity cost to standing around forever grinding an assload of monsters for revives. It costs you a non-renewable resource. In Ghoul Patrol, you just find an enemy spawner, literally anywhere in any level, equip the crossbow, and tape down the shoot button on a controller with a turbo setting. Right, that's another downgrade. Every weapon in Zam is full auto, even the ones with really low fire rates. If you want to shoot any weapon as quickly as it'll shoot, you just have to hold down the button until you want to stop shooting. No mashing required. Ghoul Patrol decided instead to fuck all that up and make all the weapons fire one bullet per button press. Enemies, and especially bosses, have a lot more health and no iframes, which makes actually fighting things kind of exhausting after a while. All just to shove in an unnecessary run button. God damn it! Some of the things I hate the most for game controls are adding a jump button to a game that doesn't need one, not allowing full auto for weapons for no reason, and requiring a button held to run for no reason. Seriously, I think the only time I've ever thought, good thing this game has a run button, was Sly 2. The movement in that game worked great with a run button. See, it's a stealth game, and moving the control stick all the way to the edge gives you the fastest movement you can do that still counts as sneaking. This makes sneaking around at max speed very easy, without any risk of being detected just because you pushed the control stick too far. It properly centers the game around the fun part of stealth, avoiding sight lines and finding sneaky alternate paths, instead of just endless needling about exactly where to put the control stick to avoid making footstep sounds. And it still allows you to easily sprint whenever you like, through empty areas, platforming sections, or even to make noise on purpose to lure a guard off their patrol route. Hell, going back to Shadow Hearts, that game had something brilliant. Sprinting around in some of the dark, quiet environments could kinda kill the mood and evaporate the tension. So, for the sake of role-playing, the game implemented a walk button. By default, most players just want to get where they're going quickly, but if you want to move slow and soak up the atmosphere, you can opt into that very easily. It actually enhances the game for everybody. Ghoul Patrol just makes you hold down the shoot button for most of the game, something that goes against my ZAM instincts so hard that I didn't even discover that you could run until 80% through my first complete playthrough, and I didn't find it on my own. I had to look up the manual and stop to read the controls in detail. And look, this is probably the worst singular element of Ghoul Patrol. In ZAM, Julie controls real smoothly. She's got a nice, fast run speed, but not so fast that it's hard to see what's ahead of you. It can occasionally be awkward to pick up items or rescue neighbors because of their small collision boxes, but because Julie can instantly change direction, it's not hard to turn back if you need to. In Ghoul Patrol, Julie's handling is about as slippery and lethargic as Luigi after a whole bottle of sleeping pills. There's a strange, failed attempt to simulate momentum, meaning it takes her much longer to start moving after an input registers, and she has to slide to a complete stop before she can change direction. This makes fine adjustments a major headache, and ultimately feels like certain inputs sometimes have major input lag. This is because the Super Nintendo only acknowledges 8 directions. The only way to follow this red line is to hold the cardinal direction and press the diagonal occasionally to stay on course. In ZAM, this is fast and seamless. In Ghoul Patrol, Julie has to slide to a stop at each circle, making it easy to overshoot where you wanted to go, and you always have to slowly build a new run in the next direction. If ZAM Julie isn't perfectly lined up with a door, she can fly through fine angle changes without slowing down. Ghoul Patrol makes this a headache, compounded by the game increasing Julie's size to make her sprite more detailed, but not increasing the size of doorways to compensate. This is heavy and awkward, even if you walk instead of run. This makes it hard to turn around and pick up things you missed, and hard to line up getting them in general. It's also hard to gauge how long you should hold the button to move some distance, because your speed is inconsistent and changes based on how long you've been running, and some of the time holding a direction is also spent skidding to a stop. It honestly feels like the best way to play Ghoul Patrol is to pretend like the entire game is one of those slippery floor puzzles from the ice gyms in Pokemon. Reminder that Ghoul Patrol, like ZAM, is a single-stick shooter, meaning your only engagement with enemies is to shoot your weapon in a straight line in the direction of your last movement, and being a Super Nintendo game, there are only 8 directions you can face. Let's talk about that for a minute. This probably annoys me more than it should, but possibly the most requested feature I've heard from people wishing for a ZAM remake or follow-up is make it a twin-stick shooter, like it was always supposed to be. But I think ZAM actually makes an excellent case for the benefits of a top-down shooter being single-stick. The core engagement of a twin-stick shooter is pretty simple, ultimately. Point the move stick away from enemies, and the shoot stick towards them. It's hard to make that deep without making it complicated, so most twin sticks lean instead into cranking up the number of enemies real high and adding a bunch of projectiles, giving them an almost bullet hell-like quality. Simple, hard to execute. That's great, but ZAM goes in a different direction. The single-stick controls mean you can't shoot at an enemy without also moving towards them. This makes even simple encounters with simple enemies more challenging, and requires you to sometimes choose when and where you want to fight, particularly while moving through a level. Yes, single-stick is a limitation compared to twin-stick, but in the same way gravity is a limitation to the way you move through a level in Mario. Saying, top-down shooters should always be twin-stick because it's the right way to control that kind of game. Is like saying platformers shouldn't have gravity because water levels are the right way to make levels. Limitations aren't strictly bad just because they take away options. Good design is more nuanced than more options equals more good. Collecting objectives, looking for ammo to fight against entropy, and strategically running away from enemies gives ZAM a game feel that's almost unique. Rather than the simple answer and tough execution of most twin-stick games, ZAM is less demanding in its precision and has fewer moving pieces, but it's much more tactical. It requires you to think quickly under pressure. It's excellently optimized around the single-stick limitation, so much so that ZAM but twin-stick would, at best, be an unrelated twin-stick game with a ZAM coat of paint. I honestly believe part of ZAM's reputation as one of the hardest games ever made, and the begging for a twin-stick controller, is coming from people who just genuinely don't understand the game. It's a common video game convention to make the player feel powerful, and ZAM requiring you to run away or space yourself carefully defies most players' instincts, because other non-horror games have trained us otherwise. And ZAM is just too colorful and cute to read to most people the way Silent Hill does. And I'm not trying to sound like I'm better than other people for being smart enough to realize this. For a long time, I didn't get it either. It took a while for ZAM to click for me. The game tries to teach you this, but it's also generous enough with health and lives for the early game that you can brute force your way through those early game lessons without actually learning anything. And if you do, the game just feels unfair. The first 2 levels are basically free and give you a chance to get comfortable with the controls and concept. The 3rd level introduces some harder enemies to keep you from getting bored and to raise the expectation of difficulty. Level 4 is different. There's like 7 of these chainsaw guys, and it's basically impossible to kill all of them this early unless you have advanced knowledge of unintended mechanics. Fighting them is pointless, and they can blast through the walls of the maze to chase after you, making it hard to lose them. The only thing you can do is run. Constantly. You could use a monster potion, which helps a lot, but you only have 1 at this point, and that's not enough to deal with all of them. Sometimes you can't fight. Sometimes you just have to run away. Level 5 is super easy, maybe the easiest level in the game, to give you a break from the panic attack in the last level. And because it's a checkpoint, so you could theoretically return here later with a password. Not realistically, we'll get into that later. And level 6 is one of the best designed levels in the game. You already knew it's possible to charge through like an action hero, because every other video game already trained you to do that. And level 4 trained you to sometimes have to run away like a coward. But in level 6, neither of those strategies work in isolation. The mummies are too bulky to just plow through without slowing down. And the corridors are too narrow to walk past them, so if you just always run away, you can find yourself in a mummy sandwich. Sometimes you have to run away and fight. It's a lesson on picking when and where you have to fight, because you can't always just mow down your enemies, and you can't always just run away. ZAM will overwhelm you if you play it like an action game, so it's no wonder most people find it overwhelming. Ghoul Patrol is having none of this nuance or depth. If I had to compare ZAM to something, Castlevania 1 would be apt. It punishes you for just holding forward blindly, and forces you to be cautious and think through what you're doing. If I had to compare Ghoul Patrol to something, I think the closest I could get might be Mega Man X7. The combat of X7 is an unengaging slog, but that hardly matters because you can just walk around most enemies without any resistance, so you just ignore them entirely. Lining up shots in Ghoul Patrol is a massive headache for a half-dozen reasons. Just getting into position is hard and involves several kinds of inconsistent input delay. And you have to get much closer for enemies to start chasing you than Zam. Even while they're chasing you, they tend to drift around and have the same heavy, slippery qualities as Julie, making it even harder to adjust your aim. Zam monsters could turn just as sharply as Julie, and would often line themselves up for you because they were limited to moving in the same 8 directions as the player. Some of them could even only move on cardinals. The challenge doesn't come from aiming the shots, it comes from crowd management and balancing a bunch of different kinds of risk. Ghoul Patrol just never gives you any incentive to engage with enemies. It's difficult, unsatisfying, there's no reward for doing it, monsters pose almost no threat to you or most of your neighbors, and you can just walk around them to keep going, so who really cares? Now, regarding neighbor placement, Zam could be extremely cruel sometimes. Some people are insanely hard to save, even if you already know exactly where they are and what kind of danger they're in. In some levels, tourists will turn into werewolves once an invisible timer expires, which is basically an instant death for that neighbor. Some of these timers are extremely harsh, and require you to not only already know where they are and use speed shoes to save them, but you only have about a half second of lenience, even if you're perfect and you try to save them first. One level is infamous for 100% runs, with a were-tourist placed on an 8-second timer at the end of a 10-second sprint. It's literally physically impossible to reach them in time. Rescuing every neighbor is so absurdly difficult that basically only 2 people have ever verifiably done it without save states, ever. And that second one was like a few months ago. But neighbors aren't placed randomly, or even loaded in a random order. If you only have 4 neighbors alive, then neighbors 1 through 4 are loaded, while 5 through 10 are not. Many of the neighbors in extreme danger are late on the list. A low body count means only the safer neighbors will appear at all. The game is basically cranking up the heat really high on the highest achievers. It's trying to keep you feeling under pressure, keep you hungry for points to get your neighbor count back up. I think this creates a lot of tension that's appropriate for a spooky monster game. It also has a nice side effect. Having fewer objectives means you don't have to spend as much time looking for them. There's an odd balancing act between the 2 major lose conditions. The game eases up a bit when your body count is too low, to not be too cruel because you could lose the entire run to just a couple of mistakes. But if your body count is too high, the bonuses become irrelevant. So if you get too far in the game with too high of a body count, the game starts playing dirty to knock you down a peg or 2. Although, if you pick at the seams, some of the game's limitations can be turned in your favor. Neighbors and non-boss enemies will unload if scrolled far enough off-screen. If you can't reach somebody in time to save them, you can run the other way to unload them. I've been calling this advanced tech screen manipulation. Normally I'd show a clip of that here, but the randomness of enemies makes it tough to do on purpose somewhere to get footage of it. Enemies will also stop spawning if too many of them are already on the field. Typically, the limit is 6, though some enemies will refuse to load if there are 5 slots occupied. Exploiting this limit to disable spawners located right next to a neighbor in peril is a thing I've been calling sprite manipulation. This even prevents were tourists from transforming. This is literally the only way to save these bastards in level 28. It can be slow, dangerous, and isn't always easy or possible to set up, but it can be a run saver sometimes. Neither of these techniques really work in Ghoul Patrol. First of all, enemy spawn limits are tied to individual spawners. So, an individual eyeball spawner only stops dumping enemies onto the screen when too many eyeballs belong to it. This doesn't stop other spawners, so the enemy spam has been really cranked up in many areas of Ghoul Patrol. Screen manipulation doesn't really work either. Many enemies are instanced, meaning they only load once and don't respawn. Instanced enemies deactivate instead of unload, so screen manipulation just puts them to sleep, and they immediately wake up when you get close to them again. Even enemies that are tied to spawners can't be manipulated well. The loading radius seems to be larger, your movement is harder to control, and there's no radar to use as a guide, so it's significantly harder in the few situations where it is possible. This is a ZAM pro tip. If a neighbor is outside of roughly this area, then they aren't loaded. Without a visual indicator like this in Ghoul Patrol, you'd basically be setting up the manipulation blind. I need to pause here for a second. I'm aware that there are criticisms that could be made here, that these are obscure techniques that are never explained to the player, mostly because they're clearly not intended by the developer, and that they feel very video gamey, relying on things like hardware limitations and the logical limits of the game's structure, rather than anything to do with the game's fiction. I know it's easy to argue that this isn't the optimal way to achieve the results that I'm praising this tech for, but at some point, we need to stop talking about the way we wish the game was, and talk about the way it actually is. It doesn't matter what ZAM could be or should be, the way that it is includes sprite manipulation and screen manipulation, and those techniques increase the depth of the game, and yet they're still never required to make progress. Screen manipulation saves your neighbors, but makes your route longer and more specific. You have to move a specific direction to manipulate neighbors off screen, and if there are monsters in that direction, you're gonna be in danger. You could stop to fight those monsters, but that delays the screen manipulation, and that neighbor is in danger until you unload them. What do? Who do you prioritize, yourself or your neighbors? Who can you afford to prioritize? Sprite manipulation is limited in that not all monsters can be manipulated, and not all levels have monsters you can manipulate. And even then, forming a conga line of zombies so that all the enemy slots are full and all the monsters are behind you can be resource intensive, dangerous to set up, and prone to failure if you have to navigate tight corridors. This, again, puts a lot of pressure on Julie's life and her resources, instead of on her neighbors. Who do you prioritize? Who can you afford to prioritize? Ghoul Patrol has both removed that depth by changing spawn logic to prevent sprite manipulation, and gutting various mechanics to make screen manipulation virtually impossible. But even if it hadn't, the level design would never require something like that. Like, without these techniques, Ghoul Patrol's Julie is much weaker, but the monsters are barely threatening, so it's not like she's struggling. Zam was hard in the way the old Donkey Kong Country games were hard. The game is asking you to do something very precise and demanding, and gives you very tight handling and some hidden secrets and advanced tech that can give you an edge. Ghoul Patrol is hard in the way that Bubsy tier shovelware is hard. The things the game is asking you to do aren't difficult or demanding at all. There's just so little lead room and your character is so drunk off their ass that actually figuring out where to go and getting your character to listen to you is immensely sanity depleting. Neighbors aren't really in much danger at all in Ghoul Patrol, often requiring enemies to be specifically lured over to their locations, sometimes over great distances. Making matters worse, every time you defeat a boss in Ghoul Patrol, the game just tops off your body count back to 10. This can happen after just 2 levels sometimes. Not only is this less dynamic than Zam, it's also biasing towards the side that makes you spend more time in levels. In a game where levels are larger, harder to navigate, involve more backtracking, the character is harder to control, and you have to backtrack to the exit when you're done. While neighbor deaths in Zam are always stressful and make the game challenging, it's actually a relief in Ghoul Patrol. That's one less objective to worry about. After my first run, I often found myself going to great lengths to lead enemies to neighbors just to have fewer objectives, and this made the game always refilling them every couple of levels feel cruel more than anything else. It's hard to tell what Ghoul Patrol is going for with this. Being extremely safe with neighbor placement and constantly topping you off back to 10 suggests that they want the game to be easier. But stuffing the game full of instant death traps, slashing Julie's iframes after taking damage, making monsters have larger collision boxes so they're easy to get stuck on, making every monster still be able to damage you either while spawning in or during their death explosion, and not giving you any health kits until deep into World 3 of basically 4, is all aggressively mean. To be clear, this still doesn't make the game all that hard, really. Monsters are very slow and mostly ignore you. Many of them just slowly float around and pinball off walls, or move in set patterns like the Boo Rings in Super Mario World. Julie can get her entire health bar utterly mulched in seconds now, and there's no reliable healing for almost the entire game. But who cares? Small enemies don't have collision and won't chase you, and everything else will mostly just ignore you, and is generally even slower and has even worse handling than Julie does, so you can still outmaneuver pretty much everything. Ramping up Julie's squishiness is cruel in spirit, but changes to her environment make this ineffective in practice. So it's more punishing for lower skill players, without being challenging or interesting for higher skill players. Worst of both worlds. At a low level, you're just totally fucked, but at a higher level, the unreliable healing is enough to get you by. What do I mean by unreliable healing, though? Zam had these floor burgers that would instantly restore 3 health when you pick them up, and you can't save them in your inventory. This is actually brilliant. Having health kits as the only healing method kind of lowers the tension a bit. Burgers let you make health kits rarer, and create situations where players aren't sure whether to heal now or hold out for a burger later. However, burgers are horribly underutilized in ZAM. There's only like 4 of them in the game and only in 2 levels. As a result, ZAM does just bias towards health kits anyway. Replace health kits with burgers as a cabinet drop and sprinkle some more burgers around some levels is basically the only major feasible to implement design change I'd make for ZAM. And probably adjust some water mechanics and be a bit nicer with some neighbor placements. But oh well, it is what it is. Ghoul Patrol replaces the floor burgers with floor raw chickens for some reason. The first 2/3 of the game is littered with floor chickens, and health kits are basically unobtainable for almost the entire game. But after a while, the floor chickens suddenly evaporate, and the game is just stuffed full of health kits instead. The latter part of the game is also stuffed full of 1-ups, just all over the place. One level puts 2 of them right next to the exit door, just so you can't miss them. As if they're aware of the fact that the upcoming levels are barely playable, and are patching over it by just giving you more attempts, rather than making them more fair. I want to cover the weapons and items quickly. I mentioned this earlier, but ZAM has a large, varied arsenal with weapons that have extremely different roles, and enemies are threatening enough and rewarding enough that exploiting their weaknesses to specific weapons is a major gameplay element. Ghoul Patrol's weapon selection is barren and pointless. Of the 5 weapons, 3 of them shoot projectiles in a straight line, and the other 2 are just worse than that. Weapons don't have special effectiveness or utility for any purpose beyond killing enemies. None of them approach it differently either. The plasma gun has a weak homing element to justify slashing its range, but the homing doesn't seem to be implemented super well. As a result, I've found that not only does it often fail to hit targets anyway, I've seen the homing ruin shots that I manually lined up correctly and would have landed if the shot wasn't homing. Actually using the plasma gun is just painful. Not as much as the shitty grenade launcher. The shots move very slowly and often fly over enemies, then land in a small area on the floor. This makes for a weapon with limited range that requires you to space your shots precisely and time them with a long delay after you lined them up with Ghoul Patrol movement against a moving target, and your reward is that its damage is the same as the normal pistol and the shitty plasma gun. As a result, the normal gun and the laser pistol are the only 2 weapons you'll ever need, and they're basically interchangeable. The crossbow is just a worse version of those 2 weapons, and you'll never need it. Ammo is so plentiful, and there's no point to engaging with enemies most of the time, so you shouldn't ever run out. As soon as this was clear to me, I started just switching to the regular gun as soon as I got it, which was early in the first level, and never switched off it for the entire game. The special items have been stripped down and handled worse, too. ZAM had keys that could be used to open doors. Skull keys that were the only way to open skull doors, mostly as a way to enforce boss fights. Health kits as the only reliable healing you'd get. Speed shoes to boost your run speed. decoy clowns to distract enemies and stop them from chasing you, a Pandora's box that would try to clear the screen of enemies by shooting a bunch of homing, one-hit knockout fireballs out, though the homing isn't extremely reliable, and a set of 3 different potions. The blue one makes you invincible and lets you walk on water, but disables your weapons and other items. Walking on water in a game where you can swim is mostly helpful because it takes Julie like 2 full seconds to jump into and out of water, which puts people in water or on the shore in extreme danger of death by fishmen. Blue potions aren't an ideal solution to this design issue, but they are a solution. The red one turns you into a big, invincible purple monster, and replaces your weapons and items with a big punch that can destroy weak walls or blow open doors. Lastly, the mystery potion would apply one of 6 random effects. You'd either have the same effect as a blue potion, or a red potion, or a health kit, or speed shoes, or lose some health, or lose control of your character and basically turn into a zombie for like 30 seconds. Ghoul Patrol keeps the keys, the health kits, and the 3 potions, and just scraps everything else. To compensate, they added like 3 more types of potions, and that seems to be it. One of those I've only seen a single time from a random drop, and I have no idea what it does, and there doesn't seem to be any info on the internet about it. There could be even more, but they'd be extremely rare and basically never come up. First, the brown potion. Drinking this fully restores your health. It's just a health kit with a different graphic, and it makes you sit through a drinking animation to use it. There might only be one of these in the game. I can't think of anywhere else I've seen it. It's hard for me to say for sure. The other new potion you'll see, and this one's all over the place, is a green potion. Drinking the green potion makes you take damage. You can't move during your iframes, so it's literally pure downside and cannot be ditched if you pick one up. You either drink it and take the hit, sometimes for a lot more than just 1 damage, or you cycle around it forever. There's also a yellow coffee mug I found in a cabinet once, but drinking it doesn't seem to do anything, so I guess that may just be a mystery forever. Basically, none of this is useful. Keys still don't have to be equipped to be used. Just walk into a door while you have at least 1 key to open it. However, Ghoul Patrol's level design is sheer lunacy. Dozens of keys are scattered all over every single level, sometimes grouped in piles of 5 or 6 at a time. Because many rooms will have like 6 locked doors stacked up right next to each other that don't go anywhere. Why? For what purpose have you put all these doors right next to each other? Because it's really easy to waste a bunch of keys and accidentally softlock yourself, keys are just spammed maniacally all over the place. If there's 48 doors in a level, the only way to ensure the player can't get stuck from poor key usage is to put at least 48 keys down. Which is excessive if the player picks them all up and can beat the level by only opening 9 of those doors. So if you're smart about only opening the doors you need, you'll be walking around with like 20 plus keys in your pocket most of the time, and can get enough to get you through the whole game by like the 3rd or 4th level. Not that that even matters, since many locked doors just have keys placed 6 inches away from them. Why even make me walk over and pick it up? What do keys even add to the game anymore? It's clear what keys added to Zam. It was often possible to save your keys by taking longer paths through the level and backtracking a lot. which would involve a certain amount of risk, because enemies are dangerous and ammo is limited. Strategically picking when it's better to route around using keys and when it's better to burn through them is another point of depth. But in Ghoul Patrol, some levels even added enemies that can sometimes randomly drop items, or specifically keys. It's possible to grind for infinite keys if you really wanted to, for some reason. This, like the infinite ammo crossbow, is another attempt at anti-soft-locking design, but you could have just placed fewer doors. Besides, look, I don't want to argue that soft-locking the player is good design, but the fact that using keys stupidly and never picking them up could get you stuck in ZAM is honestly a pretty bold decision. Same thing with not having an infinite ammo weapon to fall back on. While getting soft-locked isn't a major threat, the fact that you could do it to yourself by playing extremely carelessly forces you to stay on your toes. It gets you into the habit of hoarding keys, saving some of the game's real high power options for breaking walls or doors in an emergency, and emphasizes the element of resource management that's central to the game's themes and motif. It's part of ZAM's core engagement. It's sort of a secret third lose condition. Extremely bad item management can kill a run just as much as other kinds of sloppy play, and it's a brave, possibly alienating choice to say, no, you can play the game so wrong that you lose all your progress and have to start over. It's easy to change what you're doing to avoid that, but you have to play ZAM. You can't play this game like something it's not. This battle against entropy highlights every other strategic decision. It means sometimes running away from enemies is the right move, but always running away will sometimes paint yourself into a corner or get your neighbors killed. Run or fight. Save yourself or save your neighbors. Save or burn your keys. Resource management is at the heart of all this, and it's definitely intentional. Watch the lead designer talk about the game, and he's constantly highlighting resource management and the bonus reward system as the game's core features. Back to the other Ghoul Patrol items. Health kits are the same, but you won't see any more than the one you start with until the back third of the game. Mystery potions are still random, but they've lost the fast-running and zombification effects, which ultimately means they're choosing from 3 good effects and 1 bad one. 3 out of 4 good effects is stronger than 4 out of 6 in a meta sense, but I'm not sure that that's more interesting. The zombification effect took control away from the player for too long, I think, but just removing it completely instead of adjusting it or replacing it with a new downside feels kind of cheap. For most of the game, you'll pretty much exclusively be using red and blue potions. They've been overhauled a bit this time. First of all, the red potion is somehow even more heavy and slippery than usual. Second, it turns you into a Grim Reaper instead of a big purple monster. I don't know why this is. I mean, I get it on some level. Ghoul Patrol has been stuffed full of instant death pits you can fall into, so the monster potion has to make you float or fly because they want it to be invincible to that too. But this is just another example of Ghoul Patrol lacking a consistent direction. I don't know why this is the best thing for the potion to turn you into. There's a strong Jekyll and Hyde undercurrent behind the ZAM red potion that's extremely fitting for the game, and the really blunt, big muscle monster solves problems with its fists is real cheesy and campy. It fits with the game's motif. Julie even keeps her baseball cap when she gets buff, which is just one of many examples of why she's clearly the far superior character. My personal biases aside, the Grim Reaper thing is just weird and baffling. Like, the Grim Reaper can still destroy walls with its melee attack. Actually, it's the only thing that can break walls now. It made sense for Muscle Hulk to blast doors off hinges and bust through walls like the Kool-Aid Man, but the Reaper thing is it's just weird. The Reaper also appears as an enemy in the final level, not even in a different color palette or anything, and I can't tell whether they recycled the Monster Potion sprite for an enemy, or recycled an enemy for the monster transformation. The blue potion also kinda sucks now, in a design sense. Not only does the blue potion now let you keep access to your weapons, it also makes enemies immediately die if they touch you. It also allows you to run around on the death plane, and uses this awkward flicker effect instead of turning Julie blue. So, the fact that the blue potion gives you invincibility, and the reason why it's blue, would only make sense if you played Zam, because Ghoul Patrol doesn't explain shit in its manual. The blue potion was actually really cool in Zam, mostly for multiplayer, which I don't have footage for because of a terrible condition doctors refer to as not having friends. See, while you couldn't attack or open doors, the second player could do both of those things, and enemies would still try to attack the ghostly player, allowing them to draw aggro away from the other player and help with crowd management. It also opens up strategies like having one player run around on the water trying to save marine neighbors from fishmen, while the other player provides cover fire from the shore. None of that matters when Ghoul Patrol both removes all the marine neighbors and monsters, and just lets you keep your weapons and items anyway. Actually, Ghoul Patrol even makes enemies no longer aggro to the player using a blue potion, which doesn't even allow for teamwork plays in multiplayer. Drinking some blue juice around your buddy just makes all the intelligent enemies or bosses dogpile on the non-invincible player. Monster potions still draw aggro, so drinking a red one in a boss fight still functions normally. But drink a blue potion against a boss, and they stand completely still like a moron, because they get confused and have no idea what to do. Forgive me for not having a clip of that. I wrote this into the script real late, and I'll play Zam for footage all day, but I am done playing Ghoul Patrol to get footage. And Ghoul Patrol's endgame is so stuffed full of instant death pits and just absolute spike spamming guillotine trap hell through a chasm of nonsense level geometry that using red or blue potions is the only painless way forward. Seriously, look at this section. Clearly, this platform is leading us up left to cross. Oops, you died from full health, dickhead. Try again. Fine, quickly hop back up and we'll keep going. Obviously, we have to jump down left to, oops, you just lost another life from full health. Putting aside the fact that Zam didn't have instant death traps in it because it's completely unnecessary. Fuck, Zam didn't have anything do more than 1 damage except a single projectile on a single enemy. But none of that matters. The problem here isn't that these platforms are lacking shadows to convey their height. The problem is that they do have shadows that lie about their height. This game seriously just painted some wily coyote shadows onto thin air to trick you into jumping off a cliff. These platforms appear to make a curve, like on the left, but they're actually arranged in an arch, like on the right. This is likely just because the game is older than 3D being a thing in video games. There's no real-time lighting or 3D perspective built into the engine, so the shadow is most likely just painted onto a single platform sprite copy-pasted around the level, and each platform has a Z-axis value invisibly assigned to it. Intentional or not, this is an act of deception that's likely to cost the player at least 1 instant death trying to cross without a potion, and a total coin flip on the last jump, because there's zero indication about whether that last platform actually is where you think it probably should be. Oh man, I wonder why the game would have just dropped 2 extra lives right next to the exits so you couldn't miss them right before this happens. I guess we'll never know. The game gives you more than enough potions to skip it, though, so fuck it, bottoms up. Why not? But then that just completely removes the entire challenge. It's like making an elaborate bullshit maze that sucks to navigate and saying, oh, no, see, it's fine. If you brought some keys from another level, you can just walk around the maze and skip it entirely. That's not fun. This kind of thing doesn't really happen in ZAM. Let's look at level 42 really quick. First of all, the spike maze isn't lying about level geometry or instantly killing you over a single missed step. Second, there's only one type of enemy here, and they're not very dense. You have to stay moving and stay active, but it's manageable. You don't have to juggle between weapons to exploit weaknesses, or spend a ton of time wrestling enemies in spike patterns at the same time, but you still can't just sit still and chill for 5 minutes straight studying the spikes. ZAM's level 42 is another one of the game's best designed levels, I think. At least conceptually. The spikes dictate the pace of your movement, giving it a unique feel compared to other levels. And there are a couple of different tactics that consume different resources. Ghoul Patrol's level 4-2 is pure chaos. Spikes are slapped down carelessly through long winding corridors full of near-invincible pinball enemies, and a bunch of instant death pits placed haphazardly all over the place. There's really only one way to engage with Ghoul Patrol 4-2, and it's to use a red or blue potion. What else can you do? All the enemies in this level are too bulky to shoot through reliably, and weapons don't interact with anything else, so weapons don't do literally anything. What else even is there? Use a health kit? The pits kill you instantly. Use keys? It's just health kits and potions. That's all you have. That's all there is. ZAM 42 can be made much easier with a red or blue potion, still, but the neighbors are in enough danger that it's not completely free. And that's not the only solution. Potions are rare and valuable. What if you can't use one, or want to save it for one of the many boss fights that are coming up? Well, the cross provides invincibility to lots of stuff, but not spikes, or the other environmental hazards like killer weeds and Tesla coil lightning. Actually, if you separate its invincibility into categories, you'll find that the cross invincibility typically fails against trap-based or alien-based damage, and mostly protects you from gothic/undead damage. I love this game so fucking much. Werewolves are goth as fuck, so the cross protects you from them completely and shreds them instantly. It lets you focus more on the spike patterns, without bypassing the challenge completely the way potions do. But the cross is really rare and valuable. What if you don't have any, or don't want to use it? Still, no problem. Silverware is an instant kill on werewolves. The low rate of fire makes it not ideal if you get dogpiled by a few of them at once, but it still has enough power to keep you relatively safe. No silverware? Clowns. Clowns can slow the werewolves down and give you time to chip them down with other weapons. No clowns? Rocket launcher. Julie has invincibility to floor hazards during the bazooka's recoil, letting you not only plow through a ton of werewolves with a single shot, but also strategically boost over some spikes without waiting. Saving your rockets? Understandable. Freeze the werewolves with a fire extinguisher, and pick them off with a weaker weapon while they're vulnerable. Hell, bust out some Pandora's boxes to clear them out. You have plenty of options, depending on what you feel comfortable using and what you think is important to save for later. The invincibility of Zam's potions makes them extremely enticing, and it's hard to find a level that isn't made much easier by downing one. But there's not a lot of them out there, and plenty of other options, so it can be hard to figure out when it's good to drink one and when it's better to try another approach. With no other options, Ghoul Patrol is hyper-centralized on potions, which is a problem because the potions are so absurdly busted that there's basically no point in the game where it feels like using a potion wouldn't be a wasted opportunity, until you hit one of the choke points where you're basically forced to. There's more potions than choke points, so if you know that, you just chug a potion every time you get to one, with no consequences. And if you don't know that, then you can chicken out and chug a potion every time you feel some resistance anyway, and the game will never punish you for it. As a result, the final 2 levels in the boss fights can only be one of 2 things. Either controller through the TV, frustratingly difficult, or grandma holds your hand and reads you a bedtime story, patronizing and sleep-inducing. Oh, yeah, boss fights. Bosses in Zam weren't great. The big baby and giant spider fights are chaotic and almost impossible to actually engage with outside of brute force and dumping a bunch of health and/or ammo into them blindly. The snakeoids are actually pretty cool, though, and the final boss is at least a thing you can fight. It has identifiable attacks that can be avoided, instead of zipping around way faster than you can move in a pattern too erratic to predict, like the baby and the spider. A mixed bag for sure, but not awful. Ghoul Patrol ruins all of that. The first boss is this weird, giant police robot thing? Then you fight the disembodied floating top half of a zombie samurai. Then the disembodied floating top half of a zombie pirate. Then the floating disembodied top half of a zombie knight. Then you fight basically Satan. All 5 of them are closer to the giant spider than anything else in Zam, basically just chasing you around extremely aggressively and occasionally shitting out hellstorms of projectiles without any warning. And while Zam bosses are placed organically in levels that have other things happening in them as the centerpiece to a themed level, Ghoul Patrol bosses teleport you from a level to a big empty square room with one big thing in it, then teleport you to a new level when you're done. And all of the Ghoul Patrol bosses have way too much health. At least 3 or 4 times more health than could be considered reasonable. In spite of that, though, you can just drink a red potion and slowly drift over to them, mashing any button you want for about a full minute. By the time it wears off, the boss will be about 80% dead. This doesn't make the fight fun, but it makes it actually possible. Fighting these motherfuckers without a potion might literally, actually take 10 minutes or longer if you didn't want to burn a really stupid amount of health in the process. It's hard to even find openings against most of these things, and potions are plentiful enough so you might as well use them. This is especially because the password system in Ghoul Patrol is somehow even more fucked up than the password system in Zam. I don't even know how you do that. It literally shouldn't be possible. For most intents and purposes, on a casual level, ZAM's password system is less than useless. ZAM has this reputation for being one of the hardest video games ever made, a reputation that I definitely think is undeserved. It's certainly not easy, but it's totally doable if you play it correctly. See, ZAM's passwords are very short, and this is because they don't save your inventory. If you decide to take a break, or get a game over and have to use a password to continue your game, you'll start at a later level with only your beginning equipment. It doesn't even refresh your neighbor count back to 10. You'll have however many you had when you got the password. This makes the password system excellent for extreme difficulty runs and literally nothing else, despite the game signposting it as a way to save your progress. I honestly believe that the most significant factor in ZAM's brutal, tough-as-nails reputation comes from the fact that most people who've played the game were accidentally playing on the turbo-hard, fuck-your-balls-to-death difficulty without even realizing it. Ghoul Patrol does the same thing, but when it gives you a password after every boss fight, actually entering the password takes you to the boss fight with nothing but the crossbow and a single health kit. This makes using any kind of password completely laughable, as you're suddenly thrust into some of the longest and least playable boss fights I've ever seen, with nothing but a pea shooter. It's so cartoonishly cruel and demanding that it's not even really good for challenge runs anymore. Lastly, I want to talk about cabinets. ZAM was full of stuff like kitchen cabinets, trash cans, and dirt piles that could be ransacked for random items. The curtains in the castle kind of blend in. You may not know these are cabinets. Fuck, there's these weird gargoyle mouths that are sometimes cabinets, and I can never identify them. I couldn't even track one down to get footage to prove I'm right. Still, cabinets, trash cans, and dirt piles are all very plentiful, and immediately stand out as level features once you know what they are. You'd often get nothing when you open one, occasionally get a decent weapon or item, sometimes get attacked by a purple monster that would inflict 1 damage, and rarely get something totally game-breaking like an extra monster potion or a goddamn skull key. Every container you open gives you a 0.25% chance to skip a goddamn boss fight for free. That's nuts! There's enough boss fights that you'd have to be strategic in picking one of several fights to bypass. It's too rare and entirely random to be a primary strategy, and the really important ones can't be skipped by skull keys anyway. And you could choose to cash out for some other secrets instead, including the secret overpowered-ass flamethrower weapon. Yet again, ZAM bringing it home by asking you to make decisions with how you use your inventory. Some cabinets, notably trash cans and some dirt walls, could be opened from behind instead of from the front. This uses a modified drop table that can't result in an attack from the boogeyman. To balance that out, you're much more likely to walk away empty-handed, and the rarer rewards are even less common. When I was much younger and less experienced, my major goal was risk mitigation and health preservation, trying to get as far into the game as I could, having no idea where the finish line was. I was adamantly convinced that it was optimal to open every single cabinet from behind wherever possible, going out of my way to walk around trash cans I approached from the front. As a more confident adult, I'm adamantly convinced that it's optimal to open all cabinets from the front, to the point of going out of my way to walk around trash cans I approach from behind, since playing at a higher skill level makes it easier to avoid other sources of damage, and it can be worth it to risk cashing out some health to get some really powerful items. Do you see how fucking brilliant this is? there's a meaningful decision here regarding risk and reward, where players at different skill levels will value different things and can approach the decision in a way that they're confident they're making the right choice, even if they're playing the game cooperatively at the same time. And a random element like this is important. Which weapons and items you have access to can affect how you decide to approach different situations. Cabinet drops can rack up pretty quickly, and whether you go out of your way to look for cabinets off the main path, or bother with them at all, and what you happen to get, can all push your run and the strategies you use within a level in completely different directions. Additionally, while enemy spawn regions are not randomized, the exact timing and positioning of their appearance is random. I think this hits a sweet spot, where it's random enough that good fundamentals are more important than rote memorization, but not so random that map knowledge becomes worthless. This adds a lot of replay value. And Ghoul Patrol never stood a fucking chance of implementing this correctly. Cabinets seem to be much rarer now, so the randomness is less likely to shake things up, and there's basically nothing of value for them to drop anyway. Money? That's literally the same as getting nothing. Keys? There's already too many of those. Weapon ammo? There's already more than enough, and you're not using it for anything. Potions? Again, there's already more than you need, so it's not enticing. Health kits? Maybe. Early game it would be nice, but by the late game you'll have like 10 of these and nowhere to use them, because you're skipping everything with potions. And if you don't skip everything with potions, you're going to be instantly dying most of the time anyway. Health refills are kind of pointless by then. Ghoul Patrol added extra lives to the cabinet drop table, and that couldn't convince me to go out of my way to steer Ghoul Patrol Julie's fat, drunk ass over to most of them. There's a bunch of 1-ups all over the place anyway, and basically all of my deaths came from the bad controls sliding Julie into instant death pits instead of anything else anyway. None of it matters. I honestly forgot they were in the game most of the time I was playing it. This is such a non-factor in Ghoul Patrol, I found myself thinking, God, I miss cabinets in a game that still has cabinets in it. Oh, and they made the drop table the same regardless of which side you open cabinets from, and fixed the boogeyman to hit you for opening them from behind. It's all just pointless, meaningless sludge. I'm not exaggerating when I say that every single situation that involved decision-making in ZAM has been sucked out of Ghoul Patrol. It's depressing, too, because much of this was done to try to pad out the game's length, and most of it doesn't even really work. At least, it didn't for me. Now, my first attempt at Ghoul Patrol was an absolute fucking disaster. Game overed before even getting to the first boss fight. That's because I was trying to play it like it's ZAM, putting myself at risk to pick up every key I can find, trying to actually engage with enemies, biasing heavily towards the crossbow to save resources as much as possible, that kind of thing. On my second attempt, I stopped caring about managing keys, saving potions or weapon ammo, and just started running around enemies, and I accidentally did a 100% run without save states, and it only took me an hour and a half or so. In the run I recorded for this video, I got lost in the 4th level for almost 15 minutes without making any progress, and I still finished the run in about an hour and 10 minutes. And that's counting the nearly 5-minute opening cutscene. In comparison, I generally struggled to get to the end of ZAM in less than 2 hours, and that's without doing any grinding. My first successful run took 4.5 hours, and there was no fucking way it was gonna happen later the same afternoon after my first attempt. Ultimately, the major time difference, despite all the padding, is because ZAM has 48 levels with 7 optional bonus levels, for a total of 55. Ghoul Patrol has utterly slashed this down to just 13 levels. Yikes. Now, I absolutely don't think a game being longer automatically makes it better. Example, I think Zam might be a little too much. 48 plus 7 is a lot of levels to have to do in one sitting. If I ever figure out how to make a Zam ROM hack, I'd probably make it 36 plus 4 or something. But Ghoul Patrol, even being padded to all hell, is still short as shit. Cut down the backtracking, chop the unnecessarily huge boss health bars in half, and unslog the movement, and Ghoul Patrol might literally only take 25 minutes to complete. It definitively falls off the opposite side of the balancing act. In the end, Zam is deep and challenging and pretty long. It's very much built to last, and reaching the end for the first time is extremely rewarding. Ghoul Patrol is shallow, flat, repetitive, and actually pretty short. It spoils almost immediately, even for people who feel obligated to see it all the way through. And all I felt at the end was, really? That's it? And there's a terrible symbiosis between both its fatal flaws, buried very deep into the design of the game. You can't fix only one side of its issues. Ghoul Patrol's mechanics suck, but even if you fixed them, the level design still wouldn't create interesting situations. And if you fix the level design, the shitty, shallow mechanics and terrible weapon, item, and enemy designs wouldn't let you do anything fun in them. The game needs so many fundamental changes that by the time you made Ghoul Patrol good, it wouldn't even really be Ghoul Patrol anymore. Nothing in Ghoul Patrol matters. While Zam was an undeniable passion project, refined by countless hours of the lead designer playing the game in his free time with his friends, Ghoul Patrol is a corporate husk, more interested in wrangling up some extra cash with a thing that is technically a video game and technically a sequel than doing anything of value. Don't get me wrong, making a video game is difficult and time-consuming. I have a lot of respect for anybody who contributes a bunch of time and energy to make one of these things. But despite all the hard work the development team put in, they're doing it because their jobs depend on making this game because somebody higher up said so, and working this project beats starving to death on a street corner. That's the takeaway. After 2 hours of this nonsense, 40 pages into my script, that's the lesson we can learn from this project. Zam isn't a perfect game, and while it's certainly not for everyone, it's a fun, challenging game with a clear vision that inspires me to create monsters and reminds me not to take myself or my art too seriously. Ghoul Patrol is a game for nobody. It's an aimless, unfocused, unbearable slog that makes me dread ever having to play it again. It reminds me that nothing ultimately matters because we're all going to die someday, so what's even the point of anything? Believe it or not, this script has actually been edited down a decent amount. Some tangents didn't make it into the script until very deep into production, so I'll probably throw a few 6-minute tangent videos on top of this, because I can think of a few more interesting things to talk about. But for now, I think that's all I can say about this. Thank you so much for sitting through this behemoth script with me. I really appreciate it. I hate to do this to you, but I'm afraid now I have to play you out.
Whoa, nice graphics! I like to get my hands on that game. It's Ghoul Patrol, and it's really rad. Them ghouls going around are pretty bad. Goats and ghouls, and the zombies too. With your help, our heroes pull through. Oh yeah. Pop on a game of Ghoul Patrol. It's the best game there is, you know. No more zombies ate my neighbors. Cause they don't like their stale flavors. Zombies. Ghoulies. That's right. The Ghoul Patrol from the very start. I got the heart and smarts to play the part. The Ghoul Patrol. Peeping through with an overhead view, cause patrols gotta do what patrols gotta do. So I stay on track, collect the facts, never cut slack, and I always watch my back. Yo, Jack, the Ghoul Patrol. Don't ask them, the patrol's got the plan, cause the power's in my head and the power's in my hand. The Ghoul Patrol.
Wait, stop it, hold on, no.
Huh?
I don't know what's worse, your rapping or Ghoul Patrol, cause they both suck, and I would know.
Heh, suck. I get it.
Shut up, punk. Let's get a real beat going. Dr. Killer on the microphone, representing.
Slipping and sliding and stumbling around. Too many of these keys to be found. The points are pointless, don't be disappointed. Level layouts feeling very disjointed. What's behind door number 20? Doesn't matter cause there's still plenty. Run, stop and go, can't accelerate. No need to worry, no hallways, that's straight. Ammo, kablamo, weapons, who needs them? Default's infinite and it still bleeds them. Constant help me, save me from your neighbor. Remove the radar, now it's a labor. Every 10 steps there's yet another wall. Cram enemies fall into all small hole. Each boss fights the same and they're the same hassle. City, Asia pirate, medieval castle. Leaps of faith, go ahead, make the jump. Then chug your jug to float across it, chump. At the end you wind up in hell. After this game you might as well. Blah. Ho ho. Ghoul Patrol? More like go back to school, Patrol. Blah! Dr. Killer? Oh.